Okay, hopefully that was helpful. And I wasn't here with you when we did chapter 9, which is sad because I really enjoyed chapter 9. So I had to catch up a little bit this week. So maybe we can start off. I don't know who was here and who wasn't here with chapter 9. Do we want to go backward, or are we good to go forward with chapter 10?
We can really go forward. We had a good discussion on chapter 9.
Yeah, I
Seems so long ago now.
yeah, I know that two
It was
two
the one
weeks
that
is a long
Alex
time
did.
away. Yeah. Well, I wonder, do you want to hop right into the reflection questions, or did you have responses or thoughts based on your reading of chapter 10?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So 10 verse 4, it said, "And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of the spiritual rock that followed behind, and the rock was the anointed."
Hmm.
Or on the other NSRV, "And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ."
Yeah.
I don't understand that at all.
So this is like an early thing that happens where like Paul, Christian communities are rereading the Hebrew Bible with like the resurrected Jesus in mind, which is not in the Hebrew Bible, right? So they're like retroactively inserting Jesus and saying, aha, they ate the bread from heaven, that's manna, and they drank this water that miraculously sprung from a rock. So that's like heavenly water and heavenly food and drink. Oh, that's Jesus. So it's sort of an anachronism.
Okay.
But Paul's saying like they didn't call it by the name Jesus. That's language we have that makes sense to us to describe the experience that they have.
Okay.
Now, I don't know any Jewish person that would appreciate that reading, but Paul's writing to Christians, not Jews. So I think as long as you can be respectful and have your own language, like go for it. What is hard, right, in Jewish Christian dialogue is when Christians tell Jewish people, your scriptures are all about Jesus, because the Jewish response is, no, they aren't, right? So like we read the Jewish scriptures with Christ in mind. Like as Christians, we do that, but that's not the only way to read them. So I think like that's a important distinguisher.
Was there a rock that followed around in Exodus? Because I don't remember that.
There's not a rock that follows around. They come to this place. There's two places where they're thirsty and there's nothing to drink. And Moses is in one case to hit the rock, which he does, and water comes out. We went there in Jordan, and then the other, and well, you know, there's water kind of coming out of a rock. It's not like spraying or anything. It's just coming out. And then the other place he's supposed to speak to it, but he has a fit and he hits it, and therefore he can't enter the promised land. Now that's a weird story, but that's in Numbers. That story is.
Okay.
So there's no rock that follows them around, nor does the manna exactly follow them around. I mean, for all we know, it's everywhere in the desert, including where they're not.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought that was very bizarre. Like I got like, okay, I know before the beginning there was the word, and the word like maybe
Yeah.
like it went back like that, but I didn't understand what Jesus was supposed to, the Christ or the Logos was supposed to be in this story.
Yeah, you know, and there's this interesting dichotomy too, because like the rock was the anointed one, but my NIV renders that the word Christ. And I guess this could be the same thing because that's what Christ means.
Yeah.
But it could also mean like the rock was like anointed by God, which wouldn't necessarily be the person Jesus.
Okay.
So I mean, there's opportunities. I think mostly what Paul's trying to say is like we're accepting the spiritual food and drink that happens at the Eucharist in Jesus. And look, that isn't new. Actually, like God's provided spiritual food and drink for people in bondage that happened in the wilderness. So like Jesus isn't the first time that's happening. And even people getting spiritual food and drink then and now still need to make the most of what they have.
Yeah, well, he invokes these Old Testament stories, like you said, to say that God loves us and provides for us. And there's another story he refers to, which is Exodus, which is where, you know, God takes his chosen people and saves them and leads them out of Egypt. So they're supposed to, these Christians are supposed to relate to that as well. You know, to say, hey, God looks after us, provides for us. But do they see themselves, these Christians, as the chosen people?
That's really hard to figure out because in Corinth, like probably not. Like when we read Acts, very few Jewish people respond to Paul's message of the way and inclusivity. Usually Paul is preaching to people who are standing at the door of the synagogue listening, but they're not going in because they refuse to be circumcised.
Okay.
So do they see themselves as circumcised Jewish people? The majority seems like not, but
Okay.
maybe they are, for lack of a better word, appropriating the story as their own.
Well, even as Gentiles, would they at some point see themselves as chosen, the chosen people?
The Gentiles?
So chosen is a weird thing, right? And I do want to say that like we as Christians don't like get election very well, right? So like when I talk to the rabbi, and this is still today the case, right? I talked to the rabbi Stewart, who, granted is a little bit gruff with Christian folk, right? And I told him, my brother converted to Judaism. His response was, ugh, did he?
Really?
Right? And I was like, wait a minute, I thought you'd be happy, like you added a player to your team or something like that. And his response was like, why would he do that? Like, we do this because we have to. Why would anybody choose to do this?
Yeah.
Oh.
So like there's this interesting response. Like sometimes we think being the chosen people means like you get special rights and privileges when you die. Like when you're chosen by God, you go to heaven. Well, Jewish people don't believe in hell. So like that's not a concern for them. And election really means like you have to live the Torah. Like you have to. God picked you to live the Torah. And if you're a Gentile, God loves you and all that and stuff, and you don't have to do the Torah. So like, why would you want to do this? Like we didn't have a choice. God picked that we must. So that's not the normal Christian view. Normally the Christian view is like, oh, you guys think you're special, don't you? And the Jewish view is like, oh, we wish we weren't.
We have all these rules we have to follow, and you don't have to follow.
And you don't have to follow, and God's not going to send you to hell. Like that's us, like again, like projecting onto them like our own end times thinking.
And if they make a mistake, God's going to discipline, if you will.
Because they have to live by a different rule book. I mean, basically that's it. So like, why would you want sterner rules when you don't have to have them? And this is why Judaism is not evangelical by and large.
Okay. But sometimes Christians, and I think evangelicals, kind of invoke this chosen concept that it now extends to us.
Yeah, and what they say is we're the new Israel because those people didn't recognize Jesus and we do, therefore we're the elect chosen ones. But like, again, if you're Jewish, being elect is not like great. Because it wasn't your choice that mattered, it was God's choice. God elected you to live under this Torah, and so you're going to do it.
Okay.
It's interesting, like the new Israel idea, you see that in Manifest Destiny in American history, where we're going to subdue the natives because they're not the chosen people, we are.
Yeah.
And subdue means commit genocide against them, right? Like that, like this is firmly in our history, we just don't like to admit it.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, really, like, this is an important thing, like, being picked by God is more of a responsibility than it is a privilege. And actually, I think that is what Paul's saying. You have responsibilities, and you're only focusing on your privileges. You're focusing on, I can do whatever I want, I'm totally free. And Paul's trying to say, like, you're not free to do, you're freed for a certain kind of service.
Right, you're free, but don't take that to the extreme. You know, you still have responsibilities like this.
Yeah,
And and they've taken it too far.
that's his argument, I think. I think that's his argument. I did want to, before we look at the questions, there is this rather interesting verse that maybe you've heard before in 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has seized you except what is common to humanity. And God is faithful. God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you're tempted, God will also provide a way out so you can stand up underneath it. Right? And I don't know if you realize that every time you see the word you, it's second person plural, not second person singular.
It's like community.
So you might be tempted beyond what you can bear, but we aren't tempted beyond what we can bear. That's a real different read, isn't it?
Yeah.
Comes back to freedom for, not freedom from. You are free to care for one another, not free from caring for one another. It's in some ways it's actually really helpful to think about in community life because, you know, having memorized that verse as a child, this is one of the key verses, like you have no excuse for doing anything wrong because you could have resisted it. But actually this other reading is maybe you couldn't, but we could have helped you. Which is why in AA you have a sponsor and you have a meeting, because you may not, you can call the sponsor anytime because y'all together can resist temptation, whereas you yourself, you may succumb.
And so, Mike, are you basing that on the actual Hebrew or whatever?
Greek, it's Greek,
The
yeah.
Greek
Mhm.
words that we.
Yeah, that's
use?
what I was looking
You
at just
and-
now. I was double checking to make sure I was right. So it's you, second person plural.
So y'all.
And that whole.
Y'all.
Y'all. So-
No, and that makes sense because he's writing to a community anyway, right? So hear it a different way. No temptation has seized y'all except what's common to human beings. And God's faithful. God won't let y'all be tempted beyond what y'all can bear. But when y'all are tempted, God will provide a way out so that y'all can stand up underneath it. And that would make a lot more sense, given that individualism is a lot stronger now than it was then, right? Like community life was much more deeply ingrained in ancient culture than it is in modern American culture. I don't mean that as a critique, but let's just be honest about that, right?
Like, is all of this just to set up to this deal about, because isn't there another chapter where he talks about eating meat?
Yeah, we did that a couple of chapters earlier. And it's interesting because you may say, why are you, well, you seem real worried about this meat business. And he's using it as a specific because it's like actually happening, but I think he's also trying to make it a generalization as well.
Yeah,
And we've seen some of the same arguments, like he did this in chapter 8.
yeah, because I remember it was like whether who can eat meat, whether they're weak, you might tempt them, you might make them feel bad. And he's like, blah, 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 and back to the meat, you know, like
Yeah.
circling back around to this meat situation.
Yeah, and so actually, like I've read a book that cleverly looks at the whole book as like A, B, C, D, E, D prime, C prime, B prime, A prime. You know, like they don't rhyme, but they rhyme in terms of sense. Like he covers the same topic twice.
It's a symmetry.
There's a symmetry. It's actually called a ring, which is like a way of antiquated writing. And so this sort of ring pattern bears out between 8 and 10. And I don't know where you say the hinge is. Maybe you say the hinge is in chapter 9 when he talks about the rights of the apostle, and then he goes back to the food. Then he's going to come back to immorality. Then he's going to talk about love. So what's interesting is the meat, it's not actually really clear what he thinks about eating meat. Because he says, on the one hand, eat whatever meat you want. But if somebody thinks you shouldn't eat the meat, then don't eat the meat in front of them.
Yeah.
But don't you hear that argument even in today's world about drinking, for instance? I was in a church that didn't really believe in having alcohol at their events because it wasn't that they didn't believe in alcohol. It was that they were afraid it would tempt someone who was an alcoholic into falling off the wagon or whatever.
And I don't want to say that's bad. I just thought there's an interesting bit where I actually find Paul talking on both sides of his mouth too, right? Because on the one hand, eat whatever you want. And on the other hand, think about somebody else's conscience. Well, if we had to always think about somebody else's conscience, we'd never be able to do anything because we might offend somebody.
Right.
Uh, and so I think that's why Paul is talking on both sides of his mouth, because when do you do what? In some ways, here, like, because we've had that conversation since I've been here about that. And it used to be that there was a known alcoholic in the group who would come, and if there was alcohol, he would get like totally drunk here, like at a church event. And this is real, like this is a real thing. Like he was an alcoholic, he died of alcohol abuse years after leaving here. And so in that context, maybe it did make sense. Although there is also like some sense to say, we're going to model drinking responsibly, right? Like that is a real thing. Responsible drinking is a real thing. And like if we practiced it here, maybe you can go home and do it too. You know, I don't want to say one's right and one's wrong, because I think you could argue either position. You could argue complete prohibition, which the Methodists do. That's why they use grape juice at communion, right? You could do that. Or you could say, look, it's like there is responsible ways to do this. So that's what we're going to model and enforce. And if I see you drinking two drinks at a parish event, I'm going to say, hey, you didn't get a third one. Or like, hey, I'm going to call a cab for you. Right? Like that's a thing that can happen. And we're required, if we serve any drink, that we serve a non-alcoholic alternative. Like, and it can't just be water, because that puts people in a tough spot, right? So like there's diocesan protocols about how we do that. We can't have alcohol at a vestry meeting while we're voting. So we can conduct business and then have a glass of wine after that, but we can't mix the two, because that sets a dangerous precedent, right? And there's wisdom in none, and there's wisdom in responsible. I don't think there's wisdom in overindulgence. I mean, I don't. Like, I actually had somebody tell me when I first got here that I should not consume the rest of the chalice after people had communion, because I was encouraging alcoholism. And and look, I understand that, but maybe they don't realize how little port is in there. And like, I'm not over consecrating. Like if you're a verger with me, there isn't a lot left, because I don't fill the chalice up. I mean, people would spill it anyway. So like I underfill in general. Now I've had an occasional funeral for 70 people where 7 people came and took communion, and there was a lot of port left. And like, I know when to stop that, right? Because I can pour it on the ground. And there's a point where I'll do that. But that was a part of my piety when I first came to the Episcopal Church, that's what you did. And so like, I don't want to say that's life or death to me, but it, like, I was formed in doing that. And so I continue to do it. And I understand that like, maybe some people could look at that negatively. I mean, this is where I think it's a really interesting thing that Paul talks about. And alcohol is an easy, obvious one, because it has health conditions. But some people might say, you know, you're having ink on your skin is offensive to people, so you shouldn't have it. And that's an easy way to entrap somebody who presents in a way you don't want them to present, is that someone could be offended. So
just don't look at it.
Well, so we have to come to terms with that one way or another. We do. And ultimately, I've chosen, I live my own life, you live yours. And I don't begrudge you making your own decisions. And it's okay if you don't make the ones I do, but I'm not going to hide them.
But I don't think he actually, as you said, I feel like a lot he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. So I'm not sure he's really giving answers to these people.
It's like
For doing,
he skirts around, he just gives the answers he thinks they want to hear.
yes, and then 3 verses later, or whatever, or chapter later, or whatever, he comes back and says something slightly different.
And I think that's because there isn't a hard, fast rule here.
Yeah.
I think there's a situational ethic.
Yeah, ask yourself, this helps. Do you see things black and white, or is gray okay for you? If you're black and white, you probably don't like what Paul's doing.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But I think all of us understand there are areas we used to think of as black and white that we've come to realize context matters. And I think if you can admit that in one area of your life, you can see him doing that.
Yeah, I just wondered if he doesn't have some of this because, I mean, just like step one, the issue of circumcision, we saw how, you know, it kept people away from what he was trying to teach and being part of this community that he really believed in. And it's like, once you see that there's this one giant step in which, people, they don't want to do it. And he keeps preaching to them and trying to include them in kind of this message, if that didn't bleed out into other areas, just the same aspect of like trying to include people, trying to, preach to them, whatever, but understanding that there are so many cultural things out there that are different that, and I know this isn't like the biblical read on it, but honestly, whenever I was reading all this stuff about the meat, I just thought, I guess what came up for me was, whenever I think about like, slaughtering animals in Judaism or Islam, it's so much more humane than anything that a lot of other people do. And at the same time, not judging people because they have to eat factory farm meat if that's the only thing they can afford to put on their table. And just kind of like that aspect of saying, well, if I can, it's great if I can afford this or be conscious of this and participate in this really healthy practice. But if for whatever reason, via resources, I cannot, I'm not going to judge you for doing what it is that you have to do to feed your own family, because that's the humane take for human beings,
Mhm.
So that was just the thing that kind of, beyond thinking about whether or not you thought eating meat was right or wrong, I guess.
It's easy if they just say, don't do it, or it's do it.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
they tell you there's some situational ethic, or moderation, okay, and then we want to know, well, is the moderation 2 drinks or,
Yeah.
tell me.
Yeah, it's
Well,
based on your body weight and your metabolism, isn't it? Right?
it's based,
And I
it
think,
didn't bother me at all what he does here.
yeah, no, I mean, I actually think what he's talking about, if you don't mind me saying this, I think he's talking about the doctrine of appropriation, which is a modern concern. Like, let's not appropriate from other folks. So specifically, he's saying, look, and I want to be really clear, when you go to the meat market in the ancient world, it's all been sacrificed to a deity, all of it. Like, there's no meat
And
that
why?
is like just a butcher. Well, because life was given to gods, and then you burn up elements at a god's table, and then you get to eat it.
Right.
And so like there wasn't like a secular butcher like we have now. And consider that's true of the Levites. If you kill an animal, the Levite has to butcher it. But in general, if you've raised the animal, the Levi will slaughter and butcher it. So like in ancient Israel, the Levite's main job was to be the butcher. And they gave some of it to God because like a life got taken, you return the essence of the life to God. That's why you can't have the blood. And then you give some of the fat, which you're not going to eat anyway, like the hip socket, the genitals, you're not going to eat that anyway. And some of that gets burned up, but then the rest you get to eat, and it's been blessed by God. So you eat at a God's table when you eat meat that's been sacrificed to the deity. So like we've really secularized that with food production. I don't want to say it's wrong, it's just different. So if you go to the meat market, you're buying meat that's been sacrificed to a deity, but that's different from going to like the maypole celebration to Thor and chowing down at the buffet, because that's going to confuse everybody else as to where your allegiance lies. Are Christians polytheist or are they monotheist? And you might start to get confused that you can appropriate anything you want. Is that word appropriation okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I used to grow up, like we read books called Kingdom of the Cults and this other crazy stuff when I was a kid, right? Where like everybody who doesn't think like us is wrong and they're in a cult. Like that's what those books basically are like. So like if I went to a synagogue, I'd have to be like always on guard that some of the evil like Jewish ideas could infiltrate me. Like I am way past that because that's nuts, right? But if I went to a synagogue, or if I went to, I mean, like when we went to the Islamic Center, we were invited to join them in the evening prayer that involves prostration and saying that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is like the last prophet. Well, I didn't believe that, so I'm not going to do it. I mean, I don't think he was the last prophet. I just don't. I think there's like still prophets around today, to be really clear. And do I think Muhammad, peace be upon him, had a vision of God that's like compelling and coherent? I do. Actually, I do think that. But I don't think it would be right for them or me to do that in their public space. I don't begrudge anybody who does. I just, and I would tell you, if a Muslim person was like, can I have the Eucharist from you? My answer would be, of course you can. I don't know why you'd want it, but you can have it if you want it.
Well, I mean, the nature of appropriation is inauthenticity, insincerity. That's how you jump yourself into disrespect.
No,
I don't know if it's inauthenticity. I think it's claiming something as your own that's actually not yours.
yeah,
That's very inauthentic.
Oh, I see.
It
I
may
see.
be,
Like a
but
personal insincerity. I mean, you participating in something that you don't actually cherish, respect, show as important.
oh, and
you know,
maybe
like
you
you're
do
not-
it because you respect it.
Huh?
Maybe you do it because you respect it.
But then, to me, that's not appropriation. You're just participating.
There's a major this is a major debate in a lot of circles right now. When is it appropriation and when isn't it? This situation, I think, is appropriation because you're going to a pagan deity celebration and going to the buffet because you just want the food. You don't believe in the deities. Like, that's appropriation. Like, you just want the good stuff without the whole belief system, which is offensive to you, and maybe it should be. I don't know. So just don't go. Right? I think that's his suggestion.
maybe it's hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at our religion, I would think things such as morning, noon, and afternoon, evening prayer is appropriation. That wasn't original. We probably stole that from Muslims or Islam. I don't know.
Well, I mean, all of it. This is be honest. So the difference between, there's two kinds of things, right? One is the word syncretism. Syncretism is when you encounter a different people group or religion that has a practice that you find really compelling, so you just bring it into yours. Like the rosary. The rosary is an Islamic practice, and we said that's really neat. So we didn't bring it directly. We added and subtracted some beads and we put a cross on it.
That's
Right.
like maybe American Indians merging witch craft doctor, with Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
That's syncretism.
Yeah, I mean, I would say December 25th being Christmas is syncretism.
Mhm.
Because it's a pagan fertility festival that had a tree that's evergreen, and that seems like a good day to have a birthday party for Jesus. Like, that seems like a good day.
And me,
Is it wrong? Is it wrong? No, I mean, there's a 1 in 365 chance we pick the right day. Right? But like, ancient people didn't write their birthdays down like we do now. Like, they just didn't. So we don't have any knowing of what's the right day. But the reason we picked that day is because you got to a really big pagan fertility festival and you were saying you can't do that anymore. And people like having parties. So you can still have the party, but it's going to celebrate Jesus, not the other thing.
It does sound a lot like opening up my new fried chicken restaurant next to your old fried chicken restaurant. Like, it doesn't sound like it was done with there was some co-option. And that's like, for me, the appropriation thing, I think it has to be careful because it's like you could turn it into like someone might be, and I know I sound like a horrible person saying this, but don't get me wrong. But the idea of like, you could say that someone might be offended by that and it could go on, ad infinitum. It's like, okay, well, Paul, he's using Greek philosophy, Hebrew scripture, probably some dualism from like whatever the Persian religion was, with the good and evil in the evil spirit, and he's putting all this stuff together. It just feels like everything could fall to that eventually if you put a fine enough, magnifying glass on it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so then we have to decide what the limits are and what taste. And let me give you an example of a limit that our bishop set. You probably know that there is this really big important meal you have if you're Jewish called a Seder. You do it during Passover, and you ask 4 questions at the meal that are based on how is this night different from any other night? Like, why do we eat bitter herbs? Why do we dip our herbs in salt? The salt is our tears. Like, this is right out of the Bible, comes right out of Exodus. You're supposed to do this. And Jewish people do it every year. In fact, like, you're kind of obliged to do it. And what the bishop has told us at clergy conferences, hey, some of y'all are having Christian Seders. And I'm telling you, no, you're not doing it anymore because it's appropriative.
Mhm.
So you're putting on this Passover meal and saying all of this is about Jesus. And that's really, really offensive to our Jewish brothers and sisters. So talk about the Lord's Supper don't talk about how Passover equals Jesus, because that's appropriative. Now, we're allowed to disagree with the bishop about our opinion, but we're not allowed to disagree in how we practice that with parishes. Now, I will tell you, when I first got here, we had Seder meals, but we didn't talk about Jesus at all. We did the Carbin Publishing, the Jewish Publication Society. We did the Seder. I explained the Hebrew. I explained why there's wine on the table and why we do this and that. And we left. And I think I could do that again, because I didn't have a Christian Seder. We had a Seder. Those are different. I hope that makes sense. I think it's okay to say, I respect this so much to put it on authentically and explain to the best of my ability as a non-practitioner what this means. Then I think when I say, but all this is really about Jesus, I think then I've crossed the line. I don't know if that makes sense. I think that's what Paul's doing. By the way, I know it sounds like I'm like just rattling all different things, but I think this is what he's doing. And talking out of both sides of your mouth or hypocrisy, that's what we call pastoral care. Because pastoral care is never black or white. I mean, it really isn't. You know, if like, and I used to be a black and white person because I grew up that way. And I remember the first time I was sitting in CPE, clinical pastoral education, and this lady came in from the children's NICU. I was working with geriatric people. She was Southern Baptist, and a baby had died, and they said, will you baptize the baby? And she did. And I was like, no, hell you didn't, because baptism is not for dead people, it's for the living. And you know, I was really firm on this stance, like you don't baptize a dead child that is like not, especially as a Southern Baptist. I was like, you will lose your sponsorship over that. And she would have. Pastorally, what did the parents want? I mean, they were probably Catholic. They were concerned that if their baby didn't get baptized, he was going to go to hell forever. So why would you deprive them of that? Now, I guess you could say, oh, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you don't need that. God loves your baby. It's going to be fine. But like that doesn't fit their cognition. I guess you could say, I'm going to give you a different ritual instead. I just don't know that that's pastoral, you know? I mean, I think there's
Just bless the child or something, or,
I mean,
I don't know.
you could do a lot of things. And I think the question is like, is there an absolute right or wrong in that situation?
That seems like just a torture for the parents.
Well, it would be torture to deprive them, that's where I've now come to. I've now come to that, right?
But would it be worse to do that? And then years later, they find out that that was not the right thing to do? I don't know.
Is it ever the wrong thing to do? I mean,
Not
that's what I,
Wrong, it just didn't take.
well,
I mean, I don't think one of us know for sure.
I mean, okay, I think here's the real question, and this is where it's good to talk about situational ethics. Is that baby going to hell?
No.
I can't possibly worship a God that would do that. I can't. So if the baby's not going to hell, and I want to send that message, and the other people don't speak English like I do, they speak put water on the carcass. That seems a good way to convey the message.
I don't know, I guess whatever the loving thing to do is. I mean, it seems like, and I've been under a couple of funerals lately, some of them have been very unpleasant. You know, I'm just like listening.
When is a funeral pleasant?
Well, no, just because.
I've been to some pleasant
message-
funerals. I've been
Yeah.
to some pleasant funerals.
But it's no, just like the message brought by the clergy member, one of them especially, and I mean, it's almost like spiritual terrorism.
Oh,
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, that's the only way I could describe, I was sitting there and everyone's just like, yeah. So.
Yeah, you try to make sense out of it. But
Oh,
it's hard to-
Frank's
yeah.
father's funeral, that pastor got in there and started talking about, you know, God made Adam and Eve, make Adam and Steve. And
that's unpleasant.
I
Yeah.
got, I started to leave, and my daughter just held my hand down, because she probably thought I was gonna get up and say something.
It's called a bully pulpit, by the way. That's
Yeah.
where you bully people
Well, it
because you have a
definitely-
chance
It
to
definitely
speak.
was a bully service.
It's
a
unpleasant.
Bully, message.
I'll tell you about pleasant funerals though, because I've done several of them. When somebody lives to be 95 and they were loved and they die, you say, well done. Like, well done, good and faithful servant. Like you did it. We're
Yeah.
gonna miss you, but man, we're so glad you were alive. You lived a long natural death. What's an unpleasant funeral? When somebody's 17 and kills himself. That's a really unpleasant funeral. How do you make it more pleasant? You tell the truth. You tell the truth and you say, yeah, we don't understand this. And for some reason, this person thought that they would have better relief from pain by doing this. And God understands that.
That's the nuanced situation in which the read on the scripture that is, God will never give you more than you can handle, is just so hurtful.
I think it's hard to comprehend.
Yeah, it's so hurtful to say, you really could have toughed this out and you just didn't make this choice to do it. And suicide is so horrific, but you know, often when people are in those places, there are societal and community failures to support them, especially children, you know.
Especially high functioning people who have mental illnesses and
Yeah.
medications don't often work for that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you were in pain all the time, I mean, I guess you could say I show my faith by suffering more, but like having no compassion for somebody does not seem like what Paul's advising. I mean, actually what he's saying is be compassionate when you consider other people. Don't just do what you want.
Seems like it's better to be loving than right.
I mean, I think that's what he's saying,
It's better to be what?
Loving than
Oh,
right.
loving than right.
but at the same time, he's willing to make his own personal stance, right? Remember, we read this 4 chapters ago where he said, this is my idea, not God's, and I still think I'm right. So I think, you know, I don't know that I don't know that he's a hypocrite or like a horrible person. I think he's just trying to be pastoral like we all
I
are.
just have such a hard time with him because anybody that would say, hey, do it the way I do it. And that, I mean.
That's one of the questions we got here, isn't it?
Yes. But he does, I mean, he does that continually, kind of like, I'm right, do exactly like I'm doing. And I don't know, even if I think I'm right, that I would say that to somebody like that. It's like, do what I'm doing. Because I think everybody has a different way. of getting
I
it
tell
right.
it to my kids all the time.
Well,
I'm
that's a
suspicious.
little different situation.
I think it's pretty applicable because I think pretty much as parents, we do that.
Is
I'm
that
not-
pretty much like saying, don't do what I do as I say do?
No, I think it's
That's what
like
my mom
saying,
always said,
I think
what
it's
you
like
just said.
saying, honey, there's lots of different ways and you're going to do it this way. Honey, other families might do that, but our family doesn't do that. We say that. I don't think that's wrong. I mean, I tell my daughter sometimes, you may hear other kids using the following words, but we don't use those words in public. No, I mean, I don't think that's wrong to say.
No,
That's our family norm. Like, that's our norm. We don't. And I don't use those words in front of my daughter. I use them all the rest of the time, but not in front of children. Like that's a situational ethic that I choose to live into.
don't do as I do as I say do.
Well, no,
Yeah, well, that's the
There's-
same thing.
there's a time and a place for most things.
There's a time and place for everything,
Yeah.
but still, if you're saying, no, that's okay.
Right. I mean, isn't that in general the case? There is a time and a place for most things.
But for me, it seems
But I
like,
don't think that's what he's saying.
Oh, I think it is.
he's
There's
saying, this is my way. This is, do it.
when he's
just
talking
like
about
I do."
meat, I think he's saying, go buy it at the market at your house. Like,
If
just do that.
If he ever says that, he's saying it attaches to that because I'm trying to follow the way, model myself after Jesus.
Now, I do.
So why
Yeah,
doesn't he
always.
just say, you
So-
need to model yourself after
Well,
Jesus,
that
not
one is a
after
little
me,
better.
right?
Yeah.
And
Better than me.
here's why I think he says that, because Jesus didn't have a lot of contact with non-circumcised Gentiles in community. We have a couple of stories where he healed somebody, where he talked to somebody, but this is living with this people 24/7, and that was not the Lord's way. He did not do that. So I think he's trying to say, given that we don't live in Syria, Palestine, and we're all Jews and we all have the same rule, that's not us, and that doesn't need to be us. What can we do? Our context is already different within 20 years. And I love what you're saying. And the workbook asked me this question: would you dare tell a fellow believer to follow you as you follow Christ? I mean, that's even hard as a priest to say, like, I would love to do that. I mean, that's just really hard.
You know what immediately came to my mind? Long ago, people were real big on putting Jesus bumper stickers on their car. And so I don't remember who it was, but someone at church said to me, don't ever do that, because the first mistake you make, accidentally cutting in front of them or something, they're gonna judge that as well. So don't ever set yourself up for that. And I always thought that was a really good thing, because, we're all human, we all make mistakes. So there's gonna come a day when you do something that is not gonna be appealing to somebody. So if you're sitting there saying, oh, well, yes, I'm a great Christian, do this, and you're not doing that, that's gonna be hard.
I mean,
right?
I'll tell you, it's hard wearing a collar. Because like, I know when I put it on, people are like hyper focused on what I do, either one way or another, right? And so like, I want to be transparent, like, I didn't get publicly intoxicated. That's like not my thing. I don't enjoy that anyway. I don't get privately intoxicated. That's not my thing. So I'm good there. But I'll tell you, just maybe innocuously, like I do get a lot of looks because of that. I do. And like I've wrestled with that for a long time. And like I used to wear long sleeves when I was wearing clericals, but the pandemic, I decided life's too short. Like it's my body, not yours. And it's okay if we disagree on that. Like, don't do it if you don't want to. And I don't say that tritely, like it took a lot of years to get there. And I know it still bothers people. In general, I think like we get along okay. It's not a deal breaker for people, but it bothers them. I mean, one of the people who called me here to be the priest said, if I knew you'd had tattoos, I wouldn't have wanted to call you.
What?
Yeah, I heard that within a year of getting here, and I heard that again last year. Same person
Last
said the
year?
same thing. Yeah, same person said the same thing. So I haven't changed their mind or won them over, and I don't need them to.
But
I mean-
what do your tattoos have to do with the way that you pastor this church, and the
Well-
way that you minister, the way that you lead your flock? I mean, have no tattoos at all, and be horrible.
So I think for some people, and I don't think it's just dependent upon your age, although I would say like more people under the age of 45 have tattoos than don't. So just to be clear on that, like that's a changing demographic, but that may not even, it's not an age thing. I think some people say, well, look, like it's a sign of flamboyancy or rebellion, or it's like it's not good in level. And so if you're willing to do that, what else are you willing to do? Like if you're going to have bad judgment on your skin, you're going to have other bad judgments with pastoral care, with church finance or whatever, right? Like, and I don't want to say they're wrong, because like that's their point of view. I just don't share it.
They're narrow-minded.
Yeah, I think so. I used to, I've heard in the past, not recently, but someone say it's like your body is the holy temple for the Holy Spirit, then it would be like you defacing in front of the church.
Or decorating it,
To get it to, yeah,
or decorating it.
Yeah.
Because those people who say that have banners in their church. I want to be real clear.
Yeah. They're like, it's like big graffiti on your church, something like that. But there's also like great graffiti art that's beautiful and powerful and meaningful. So that's a whole nother thing. But also I think as well, though, there is like a certain connotation, particularly for certain generations of like only, people who went to prison or served in the military or rode motocycles, got tattoos. And so it's like
Well, I
a
would say-
humble thing to do,
I
Yeah.
will say this, when we joined us at St. Thomas and we baptized Avery, that was the first one. 25 or so people were here for that baptism.
You always bring a group.
Oh, yeah. This church has never seen as many Black people as when I have a baptism.
That's about right. Uh-huh.
I mean, we come out, but the one thing that captured the young people's attention and made them just kind of, they saw his tats, and he had Crocs on that day, or no.
I don't wear Crocs.
No,
I don't know what I had.
Not Crocs,
Something.
you had on your Chucks.
Yeah.
They were just fascinated, and these kids, I mean, they're not kids, I mean, they're in their 30s, and they're like, oh my God, he is so cool, look at him up there, and his parts were showing, and he was up there, and they could almost tell me word for word everything Father Mike said during that service, because they were just so taken by him, and they saw his tats, they saw his cool Chucks and the way he talked, and so it can go either way,
Well, I think I think like that's just true to life, which is why I don't think he's giving us black and whites, right? Because I don't know. I will tell you, I visit a lady who's 99, and every time she's got a little bit of dementia. Every time I see her, she's as sweet as she can be, and she just looks at me and she's like, "You had a wild youth, didn't you?" I did last year. It was really wild. Like I didn't really know what to say. Like probably not as wild as you think. But like she tells me that every time, and like she wants to say that, and when I leave, she kisses my hand and tells me she loves me. Like I mean, it's just really sweet. And but I've had a wild youth. So
Seems like your tattoos are a mirror to project what everyone brings with it onto.
so is the collar.
Yeah.
So is the way we cut our hair. I mean, like a lot of that is kind of what we live in. And I don't know, I would tell you, like, if I got tattoos so that I could be cool, I think I made a mistake. I mean, really, I can tell you that wasn't what I was thinking. I wasn't necessarily doing a lot of thinking. But like the purpose was not to gain street cred with the young, cool people. I can guarantee you that, because like that just didn't make.
Well, the fact that you do reach some people because of that.
And I
It's a
prohibit
plus.
some people, if I'm honest. I do. I prohibit some people. So when I go up in the hospital, I do wear long sleeves. I mean, especially if I don't know you. If I know you, then I don't worry about it, But like, and to me, that is a way of saying situational ethics, right? Like there's a time and a place. You come to church here. I mean, this is where I live. This is where we live. So I'm gonna dress like I dress at home. If I'm coming to your event, then I'm gonna put a little more thought into your home.
We have some folks to come to our house and we had both dogs. We only have one left now, and folks would be scared of the dog and want to put it up. Go said, "Dog live here, you don't."
Yeah, and I'm mindful. I mean, when people come to my house, my dog walks around too. Now, if somebody said I'm horribly allergic, I'd say you're gonna have to take Benadryl anyway, because the dog lives in the home, right? Like, so I can put her outside, but that's not gonna fix your allergy. If you're terrified of the dog and you're my guest, I'll accommodate that. Of course I will. It'll be miserable because the dog's just gonna bark the whole time, but I'll accommodate that.
I regularly wear tie-dye to work, and people make wild assumptions
Yeah.
about my opinions.
And by the way, I don't think any of this is off topic. I think this is all right on topic. And the question is, like, how do we figure out? And I don't think there's a clear guideline in my mind about, I really don't think there's a lot of clarity. I think there's a lot of like situational compassion and consideration and respect that goes into these decisions that are not necessarily right or wrong morally, but that carry consequences for other folks.
So people just, they very intensely want to be able to look to someone to see aspects of God played out in human form. Because when you really, have a heart after God, you really, really want to emulate whatever you think that God's qualities are, which is why I think that Paul goes on so much about it. But it's just really tough as well, because, like she was saying, people, as soon as you have any belief in God of any kind, people conflate your behavior, of course, with your, with whatever faith of God that you say you believe in. And I think it's just a very natural desire to, again, just want to see the higher qualities that you believe in someone else's personhood, because it gives you faith and hope that you can live into those values yourself too someday. And it's really disappointing whenever you look to that example and, you don't see it. Like your favorite person that you go to church with, you watch them flip somebody off in traffic and you're just shocked. You're like, oh my gosh, you did that.
Don't lie to me.
Yeah. When really, of course, it's just the thing that happened. You just lost your temper. That has nothing to do with, necessarily the God that you worship. That has everything to do with your humanity. And like maybe your coping mechanisms and like stress.
Which
triggers.
maybe does have everything to do with the God you
Yeah,
worship. Like, are we
definitely.
really afraid of being like embodied people who like have tempers sometimes?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the situational ethic is if we do something wrong publicly, then we try to publicly make it right.
Oh my gosh, the daddy mom, when he didn't even say anything unkind about the other one when we went to go visit their.
Yeah.
he just made a joke, and it was so innocent and lighthearted, and I never would have thought that the other guy was offended even for a second. It was so gentle, such a gentle joke. And still, after he said it, he apologized, got up and apologized in front of everybody to this man directly. And he just said, like, sorry, I said that this other guy sings the prayers more melodically than you. It was something like, it was so gentle, so gentle. And I just thought, wow, what a beautiful example of, like really positive masculinity and of generosity and compassion and all these aspects of God. It was so moving, so moving.
Yeah,
missed
and
this.
like, I think that's we went to the Clear Lake Islamic Center,
Oh,
and there were
okay.
two different prayer
Okay.
leaders there, and one did the call to prayer and the other one, it wasn't even at his expense, just made a joke about it, just trying to be funny in the moment. And then he was like, I was way out of line when I did that. And all of us were like, what? Like, what? And
Just hyping up this other guy and talking
Yeah.
about what a great voice he had. It wasn't actually insulting this
Okay.
other man. He was just
Okay.
saying, this guy's amazing. And the other guy was the one there that was gonna do it.
yeah.
It was so gentle. It was-
Well, I mean, it's really thoughtful, and it reminds me of like, that's the problem when you drive in traffic with a bumper sticker, is it's going to be really hard to track down those people and make it right with them. Although there is something really lovely, I think, about saying like, yes, indeed, like I identify myself as a person of faith, and when I get things wrong, like we all do, I will try to make them right. So instead of being perfect, I practice perfection by getting it right when I don't.
You get a chance.
I mean, that
we
seems,
just often don't like practice it, like act of reconciliation, like the right of reconciliation between each other in a public format. We might come and apologize privately to one another and make up as friends. But, if you're short with someone in public, we often don't immediately stop once we've recognized it. We wait until we're alone and say, oh, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. When really it's like, it would be a very powerful gesture to apologize in front of everyone right then, the people that you were short with. Them.
even if they say you don't need to do that, I think the response is, you may not need me to do it, but I do.
If I do something to somebody, or if I, as big as my mouth is, I say something to somebody, if I think I've offended them, I will stop and I will apologize to you immediately, because you don't have to. Oh. You don't have. But
He will apologize for that later. Don't worry.
So, question then.
Yeah,
So when he's telling these people these things, do as I do, and, because do you think they're offended by that?
I don't know. I
I
mean,
just didn't know if you've done any reading that we aren't.
I don't know. It's a good question. Like, I do think that like, so there's different containers, and consider that we've changed a lot, where like, you used to write an email differently from you. Well, when we first email came out, we wrote it like letters. We wrote dear so-and-so, right? We don't even do that anymore. Now we just hit reply, and texts are even worse than emails. But think back when we wrote letters, there was formality to letters. I mean, a letter was very formal. There were rules. I don't even know if they teach that stuff anymore. But when I was a kid, we still learned that. And look, this is like a formal letter. So I don't know if he would necessarily say something the same way he would write it,
Okay.
because most of us wouldn't either. Most of us are old enough that we write differently than we talk because we observe formalities. So in the ancient world, like this, there is a lot of precedence for do it this way, not as a way of puffing myself up, I'm better than you, but as a way of being a pedagogue. So I think it's probably less boasty than if somebody wrote like this today.
It sounds like, just reading him compared to other writers, it sounds like he is a very, like it's made to be read aloud, like it's a very exhortational style of writing.
This is a sermon.
Yeah,
This isn't a letter, it's a sermon.
yeah.
One person got it and read it to the group. I mean, that's what it was for. And he also founded them. I mean, keep in mind, like he converted them. He got them going, and he's saying, look, I started y'all, and I care about you. And so I don't like what you're doing with what I gave you, right? I mean, I see a little bit of place for that.
Well, I think the way he put it is parallels to the other story. He's not saying, this black and white and gray or whatever. He doesn't say, I'm not gonna tell you how to act. He just says, I model my behavior after God, and if modeling my behavior helps you do it.
No, he says, do what I do. It says it in there, do as I do because I'm modeling myself after
And I
God.
think the question
But
is,
he's not saying, I'm gonna tell you how, and when you're wrong, I'm gonna tell you you're wrong. You
I
know,
I mean,
He's just
No,
saying you
but
have
he
a
does
choice.
say, do as I do.
well, and so let's consider the do as I do, because let's not let him off the hook on that. Let's keep him there,
Yeah.
but let's put him on the proper hook. What does he say about eating meat?
Several
He said,
different
if you
ones.
partake of the altar, you take of
Which
it, but
chapter?
then don't even ask where the meat comes from.
So
Like,
I-
he gives and all. I mean, let's be real, it sounds like when someone asks me advice and I'm terrified I'm gonna tell them the wrong.
Yeah,
And I don't have the guts to say I have no idea.
and so do as I do, which is consider all the different angles. Consider all the different angles and consider what impact I'm gonna have on another person. Which does not mean I do eat meat always. I do not ever eat meat. Do as I do, consider the other person. Oh, I think I could get behind that. I could get behind that.
This is why you're wording it so much. Like, it's just forever, because it's like, if you wrote a letter and then Donna was gonna read it out loud to us all every time, and what you said was just so important to us all. And we just have to just trust she was reading it the right way, word for word, every single time, if none of us could read. I mean, that is just like,
Not that much.
You better learn to read now.
Yeah, because he's talking about real world actions they do every day.
Yeah,
So he can't say, do what God does, because God doesn't eat it. You know, so he's just saying, if you want to know
and
what a good model.
He
and I
asks himself a lot of questions too in his writing.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying something out loud. He's like, do I do this? By no means. You know,
Right.
it sounds not like he would talk to you. It sounds like he's giving a speech.
he is giving a
He
speech.
does a lot of the rhetorical
Yeah.
flourishes you would expect from something like that.
And do also consider again, why doesn't he say do what Jesus did? Because Jesus only ate meat that had been cut up by Levites. But they don't live there. They live in Corinth. We're like, is there a kosher butcher or not? Like, we don't even know the answer to that.
I mean, he also said it isn't what comes into the mouth, but you know.
Yeah. And we didn't even talk about the interesting things, like what do you do with somebody who wants you to use pronouns other than he, she? What do you do with somebody who wants you to call them they, them? Well, I have members of my extended family and who refuse to acknowledge one another's preferred pronouns because they don't want to endorse that lifestyle. And what they've chosen to do really is lose relationship with that person completely. And I understand they have strong opinions about that. And I also see the loss. And so I don't know if there's a hard, fast rule about this. But that's obviously one of the topics for today. Maybe not everybody in the room has family members or associates that are gender fluid. I do.
You know,
I do. And hey, we may have said to our kids, like, my kids would never be this or that. And some of them are. And so then what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, no, Johnny, you are a boy. Well, bye, Mom. I mean, like, well, fine. You can't live in this house until you go by boy. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying I think that's Paul is speaking a bit to situational ethics.
I just wanna know, do all y'all pay taxes or just one?
What does that say?
Do all of y'all pay taxes or just one? Well,
I think that people have a really hard line about anything, but especially things like that. It's because for whatever reason, I guess this is just like my I tend to be compassionate about something that I don't understand in terms of like, I'm not willing to acknowledge for whoever you say you are. I know it's hard for me to understand that, but I think sometimes when people really struggle to acknowledge other people in the way that they are, like they're saying, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is what I think and believe, and for whatever reason, you just are not willing to do it. It's because for whatever reason, acknowledging that person for who they are will somehow cause some cognitive dissonance or separation between who you decided that you are, and they're willing to sacrifice their relationship with you in order to preserve the relationship that they have with themselves. And I don't think it's ever like, do I love you enough to prioritize my relationship with you and acknowledge this thing about you? It's, do I love myself enough? Am I confident in who I am enough? Is who are the pieces of me in enough agreement that I can see other people are different. I can see other people are not in alignment with this. And I can honor that and be okay with it and still be who I am and still have the relationship that I have with myself. So I don't, whenever I think about, people in my life who just take such a hard stance and they will not, but I can see that also they don't intend to be hateful to people. That creates huge distance within me. And I have just kind of come to the realization, perhaps right or wrong, that it's not necessarily that they're prioritizing their belief in anything over their relationship with you. It's that they're prioritizing their relationship with themselves over their relationship with you. And I think often, like, you have to do that. Not have to do it in this particular context, but I just mean, I think we're constantly doing that.
I just would add, I think because I've outed that this is happening in my own family, I would say that the people I know of who won't recognize other members according to their own sort of desire, I don't think they'd be comfortable with your description.
No,
I
of
think
course.
what they would say is, it's not that I'm uncomfortable with myself, it's because I believe there is an absolute right and wrong, and this is one of those categories.
But if they were to even entertain the idea that that wasn't the case, that could radically shatter who they think that they are and their lives and all that they're built upon.
I think that's fair
And
to
that's
say,
really terrifying for a lot.
but I think those people, and I'm like very close to some of them, like think that God would not want that for them either.
Right. Yeah.
And so
That's
I have some respect for that, and I also see the pain that it causes for them and others. And to be honest, I think that's why we don't get a clear direction here, because what's the clear direction there? I don't know what it is. Well, you just need to grow up, mother, or you just need to grow up, Uncle Billy. That's not going to work. Telling your parents or your uncle to grow up, that's just not going to work, right? And so I don't know if Paul gives us direction. I mean, the truth is, like, living in a family, like your nuclear family, is pretty darn hard for some of us. How much more so living in like a volunteer family, right? Where you can leave. I can't leave my nuclear family. I can leave this one, right? And it's hard.
Well, it's like Casey started this conversation off through the loving thing.
Yeah.
But, no, I mean, we're all looking at it from the perspective of a person who wants to be called by a different pronoun. That you should have respect for that person. But what about their respect for the person who doesn't want to?
No, that's exactly where I want to go with you, Kay, because I don't know that there's like, how do you respect both parties, right? And I do think that there's people, and I think this will probably change in 70 years. I don't know the answer to that, but like for right now, there are folks who I know and love clearly who they just don't think it's possible that you're not one or the other. Like there's not ambiguity. And I don't want to say that they're wrong, because that's silly, right? But in their mind, you can't be anything other than this or that. So to say that you're not this or that is like nonsense. Like it makes it's not like you're speaking your truth. It's like you're speaking nonsense. So like, how do you have that conversation? I don't know. Ultimately, hopefully, like if I think what Paul would say is, you have the conversation and you don't stop. Like you don't say, you either are a boy or a girl, or I'm not talking to you again. And you don't say, you either call me they, them, or we're not talking again. Like you stay in a painful conversation, knowing that there's a time and a place for that conversation, right? And I might demand to have it now and you're not ready, and that would not be very thoughtful of me, right? Like we need to be in sound mind, like don't have it first thing in the morning for somebody who's not a morning person, right? Don't have it when somebody's yawning, right? Like be considerate about it, but do talk about it.
They treat each other loving. I mean, they owe each other.
That's right. That's right. I think that's pretty fair, and I think that's probably what Paul's trying to get us to think through is, what are the consequences of how we even have conversations? I don't know. I want to give the guy a little more credit.
I have a thought, and
Not me.
I thought this before, and for one, I don't remember why it talks about things twice. I mean, we had a reason for that.
Oh, it's like a stylistic thing in the ancient world. I mean, it's
Oh,
kind of
okay.
like when we have rhyme schemes in poems.
Okay, my thought about doing it twice was that he's grown and he's changed his mind. You know, it's like today I think so-and-so, and after I've, done some exploring, some research, maybe talked to a couple people, it's like, oh, I kind of agree with that.
Well, actually, the first time he talks about it, he says, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, but God will destroy them both. So like, don't just go following your stomach around. This time he says, go ahead and eat the damn meat. Just don't do it at a pagan festival. Right? Like, and so like, I don't know that he's changed his mind. I think he's saying he's doing what we all do. Like on the one hand, okay, never do it. On the other hand, like maybe it's okay sometimes. And we like, honestly, like I live like this. George H.W. Bush said this great thing. I mean, I love this. He said, I have a lot of opinions. Some of them are really strong. I often disagree with myself. I mean, I think that's what Paul's doing, right? And frankly, we all do that. We bounce back and forth because there are a lot of things that are like, usually don't do that. But sometimes I could see that would be okay. Or usually do that, but maybe in this case, don't do that. Right? Like too much of a good thing. Or
Well, I mean, it's kind of like in the Episcopal handbook, the little handbook that we talked about. It's like, well, if you want to crush yourself, it's okay, but if you don't crush yourself, it's okay too.
yeah.
You can kneel or not kneel, it's all like.
And in general, we stand to sing and we sit to listen and we kneel to pray, right? I mean, that's it. But do your own piety. But in general, that's what we do.
Well, sometimes your knees just don't allow you to kneel, okay?
Or stand